The sacred circle burned with the fury of flames, casting long shadows across the gathering of warriors and villagers. Erik, once honored, now stood as an outcast, his jaw tight with rage and shame. Ragnar lifted his hand, his voice sharp as a blade, declaring Erik's exile. Astrid's eyes shimmered with secrets as her lips curved in a faint smile, while Bjorn whispered of destiny. "The sword of eternal honor stirs," he warned, his voice trembling with the weight of prophecy. The crowd murmured with unease, torn between fear and loyalty. Erik's fists clenched, and in his chest, vengeance smoldered. With each flicker of firelight, the path of his exile was carved, one step closer to redemption or destruction. Erik walked through the damp forest, the night air biting against his skin as the weight of shame bore heavily on his shoulders. Each step dragged him deeper into exile, yet his spirit resisted defeat. The echoes of Ragnar's words burned in his mind like an endless curse. His jaw clenched, his breath heavy, and the silence of the trees mocked his solitude. He muttered, "If honor is taken, I will carve my own." The moon's pale light pierced the branches above, casting silver streaks across his path. Each sound of snapping twigs tightened his grip on the axe at his side. Though stripped of kin and title, he refused to surrender to despair. Bjorn knelt at the edge of the fjord, his staff pressed deep into the wet earth as he gazed into the endless horizon. His gray beard shifted in the salt wind as he murmured, "The sword chooses not by blood, but by burden." His voice carried like a warning into the tide, as if spirits of the sea strained to listen. The old shaman's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and certainty. He knew that fate's hand had begun its work, and Erik's exile was only the first step. The waves crashed with fury against stone, echoing his words. He closed his eyes and whispered, "The storm has already begun." Ragnar stood high upon the wooden palisade of his hall, his gaze sweeping over warriors sharpening axes and spears below. The air rang with the clash of steel, the rhythm of preparation echoing his ambition. His voice boomed, "Strength rules this world, not honor. Let those who resist feel the bite of steel." His men raised their weapons, their roars answering him like thunder. Ragnar's eyes gleamed with cold fire, hunger for power etched into every line of his face. He looked toward the distant hills where Erik had vanished and muttered, "Even in exile he is nothing." Far from the village, Erik stood at a cliff's edge, the sea raging against jagged rocks far below. The storm winds whipped his cloak, salt spray stinging his face as he gazed into the endless horizon. He whispered, "The gods stripped me of tribe and home, but not of will." His fists tightened, and in his chest burned a fire that no exile could extinguish. The waves crashed like war drums, the storm clouds rolling heavy above, as though the world itself braced for conflict. Alone yet unbroken, Erik turned his back to the sea and walked into the night, his path uncertain, but his resolve set. The forest closed around Erik as memories pressed against him like phantoms. He saw his father's face in the shadows, stern yet proud, before it dissolved into smoke. His chest tightened with guilt, recalling the mistake that condemned him to exile. He whispered, "I failed them all, yet I live while they rest beneath the soil." The crunch of leaves echoed like footsteps chasing him, though no one followed. The night wind howled through branches, as though mocking his grief. He stopped by a fallen tree, his hand dragging across its rough bark, grounding him in the present. His eyes hardened as he muttered, "If redemption will not come to me, then I will carve it into the bones of this land." As dawn broke, a figure emerged from the trees, a younger man with a restless energy. Leif, lean and scarred by past battles, carried a worn bow across his shoulder. He smirked at Erik and said, "Exiles make poor company, but better allies than enemies." Erik studied him with suspicion, gripping the haft of his axe, but found no malice in his eyes. The silence stretched before Erik finally muttered, "Then walk beside me, if your path is not yet claimed." The unlikely companion nodded, his eyes bright with both defiance and sorrow. Two outcasts now shared the same uncertain road. Smoke rose above the tree line as Erik and Leif crested a hill. Below, a village smoldered, charred timbers collapsed into blackened earth. Women wept while children clutched rags, and the few survivors wailed at the loss of kin. Erik's jaw clenched as he muttered, "Ragnar leaves only ash behind." Leif's eyes darkened, anger flashing through him as he said, "He burns what he cannot hold." The cries of the broken carried on the wind, piercing Erik's chest with old wounds. He turned away, vowing silently that Ragnar would choke on the blood he spilled. Far from the fires, Bjorn sat in the dim light of his hut, carving runes into the wood of his staff. His eyes glowed with weary wisdom as he murmured, "The sword waits for the one who carries its weight in silence." The air smelled of herbs and smoke, thick with mystery. A raven perched on the roof beam above, cawing softly as if echoing his words. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Erik must learn that strength without sacrifice is nothing." The old man's voice carried through the stillness, bound to the threads of fate. Erik and Leif halted at the banks of a roaring river, its waters foaming white over jagged rocks. The crossing looked treacherous, yet behind them the smoke of Ragnar's cruelty rose higher. Leif spat into the current and said, "Best drown than burn." Erik studied the rushing water, his mind steady despite the danger. He muttered, "If the gods will test us, then let us not falter." Together they stepped onto the slick stones, each stride carrying the weight of survival. As icy spray lashed his face, Erik felt the pulse of destiny stronger than the river itself. The clang of steel rang through the forest, clearing as Erik and Leif tested their strength against one another. Sweat beaded on Erik's brow, his axe meeting Leif's blade with sparks. "You strike like a wolf," Erik muttered, his voice strained but approving. Leif grinned, his bow discarded nearby as he parried with a sword, "And you block like a bear, slow but unyielding." Their laughter broke the grim air, though both knew training was survival, not sport. The scent of pine and damp soil mingled with the sting of iron. Erik's arms trembled from exertion, but inside a strange warmth grew. Companionship, fragile yet real. From the shadows of the forest, Astrid emerged, her crimson cloak catching light like spilled blood. Her eyes lingered on Erik, cool and unreadable, as she said, "The land trembles beneath Ragnar's reign, yet you still wander." Erik lowered his axe, suspicion carved into his face. Leif's hand brushed his bow, ready for betrayal. Astrid stepped closer, her voice velvet yet edged. "You seek honor? Perhaps I can guide you to it." Silence stretched before Erik finally said, "Guides often lead to graves." She only smiled, leaving her true allegiance cloaked in mystery. The trio crested a ridge, gazing upon another village smoldering in ruin. Blackened wood jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Erik's breath caught as he whispered, "Ragnar's cruelty knows no end." Leif's jaw tightened, muttering, "He starves them, then burns what remains." Astrid's face remained calm, yet her eyes glimmered with something unspoken. Erik stepped forward, fists shaking at his sides, the cries of survivors cutting deep. He vowed silently that Ragnar would bleed for each life lost, and the path to vengeance grew clearer with every rising column of smoke. Whispers carried through the charred ruins as villagers huddled in fear, eyes darting toward Erik as he entered the wreckage. A man cried, "Ragnar takes all, leaves nothing but bones." Erik knelt, meeting the gaze of a trembling boy clutching a wooden toy. His heart twisted, and he said softly, "The day will come when fire turns against him." Leif placed a hand on Erik's shoulder, steadying his rage. Astrid's silence weighed heavier than words, her smirk vanishing for only a heartbeat. Among the ashes, seeds of rebellion began to stir. Night fell heavy as the group camped beneath broken timbers, the firelight painting faces with weary glow. Erik sat apart, sharpening his axe, his thoughts like storm clouds. Leif poked at the flames, muttering, "We cannot fight shadows with steel alone." Astrid's eyes caught the fire, and she said softly, "Strength is not enough. You must wield fear." Erik's head lifted, his gaze cutting through her words. The fire cracked between them, a mirror of trust and doubt. The silence stretched, heavy with choices yet to be made, as destiny drew them deeper into Ragnar's war. The night split open with the clash of steel as Erik and Leif defended themselves against Ragnar's raiders. Sparks burst in the dark as axes and swords tore through the silence of the woods. Erik roared, "Come taste the blood of exile." His axe split through the air, striking down a foe with brutal force. Leif loosed arrows that hissed through the night, each one cutting down a warrior. The battle raged, their breaths ragged, their movements desperate. Astrid stood near the flames, her eyes unreadable, cloak glowing crimson. Erik's fury burned brighter than fire, but every strike reminded him the war had only begun. The fight left Erik bleeding, a gash across his arm as he staggered against a tree. Leif pressed close, panting, his quiver nearly empty. "They hunt us like wolves," he said. Erik spat blood and growled, "Then we tear them apart." The ground was slick with blood, torches scattered in the dirt, their flames dying slowly. Astrid stepped forward, her voice smooth. "There will be no end unless you strike at Ragnar's heart." Her words twisted around Erik's pain, seeding doubt and desire. He tightened his grip on the axe, the rage in him unyielding, even as wounds burn. Astrid slipped away under cover of darkness, her footsteps silent across wet leaves. She met Ragnar's scouts at the edge of the wood, her crimson cloak catching faint moonlight. "They grow restless," she whispered, "but they trust me still." The scout nodded, handing her a pouch heavy with silver. Ragnar's command echoed in her memory. His words sharp as blades, "Lead him into the snare, and his honor dies with him." She closed her hand around the silver, her face unreadable. Yet her eyes betrayed conflict, glimmering with something between loyalty and doubt. In his hut, Bjorn traced runes into the dirt, his staff glowing faintly in the dim firelight. His voice was low, burdened with prophecy. "A traitor stands where trust is blind." His eyes clouded as visions burned behind them, flashes of Astrid's crimson cloak, Erik's rage, Ragnar's crown dripping in blood. The raven croaked above, wings shuddering in the smoke-filled air. Bjorn's hand trembled as he struck the ground with his staff, whispering, "The storm breaks when blood meets fire." His warning carried through the night, unseen yet echoing toward Erik's path. Erik awoke before dawn, the forest heavy with silence. Leif slept by the dying fire, bow still clutched in hand. Astrid sat apart, her gaze fixed on the horizon, cloak wrapped tightly. Erik studied her, suspicion biting at his thoughts, yet her beauty disarmed his anger. She turned and said, "Dawn brings Ragnar's hounds. You must be ready." Erik's grip tightened around his axe, his eyes cold. In that silence, trust and betrayal tangled like roots beneath the soil, unseen but inevitable. As the first light touched the trees, the path forward grew darker than night itself. The cave walls glistened with damp stone as Erik followed Bjorn into the depths, the old shaman's staff glowing faintly. Bjorn's voice carried like thunder trapped in stone. "The sword of eternal honor does not rest for kings or cowards." Erik's breath slowed, each echo of his footsteps heavy with fate. Bjorn struck his staff against the earth, revealing an ancient altar, etched with runes. Erik whispered, "This is my curse, not my gift." Bjorn turned, eyes piercing through shadows, and said, "Your bloodline binds you, warrior. You are chosen whether you flee or fight." Erik stood frozen, the truth clawing at his chest. His father's shadows seemed to rise from the altar, a phantom of honor lost. "I was cast out for failure," Erik muttered, voice breaking. "Yet my blood carries destiny." Bjorn placed a hand on his shoulder, steady despite age. "Your exile was not the end, but the beginning," he said. "The sword demands burden, and you carry it heavier than any man." Erik clenched his fists, fury mixing with grief. In the silence, his heart wavered between vengeance and the weight of destiny that now chained him tighter than exile ever had. Beyond the cave, Astrid stood at the tree line, watching with narrowed eyes as the glow of the altar pulsed faintly from within. Her cloak shivered in the cold wind, yet her expression was sharper than the blade she hid at her side. Ragnar's words echoed in her mind, "Bring me the warrior broken, or bring me his head." She exhaled slowly, her heart heavy with betrayal not yet carried out. "If only he knew," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her gaze lingered, torn between the silver she carried and the shadow of Erik's resolve. As they left the cave, Leif confronted Erik, his face pale in the fading light. "You are bound to this sword," he said, voice strained. "But what of the rest of us, who follow in its shadow?" Erik met his gaze, fire flickering in his eyes. "I did not seek this," he replied, "but if fate drags me forward, I will carve a path for us all." Leif's jaw clenched, torn between loyalty and fear, his hand brushing the hilt of his blade. "Then let us see if destiny bleeds," he muttered, his eyes never leaving Erik's face. Night fell heavy as they reached a ridge overlooking Ragnar's stronghold. Torches lined the palisade, flickering like teeth of fire. Erik's breath caught at the sight, his axe heavy in his grip. Astrid stood beside him, her expression unreadable, while Leif muttered, "There it is, the beast's lair." Erik whispered, "Then the beast shall know exile's wrath." In that moment, the weight of bloodline, betrayal, and vengeance fused into a single purpose. The stronghold loomed, a shadow against the stars, and Erik's path toward destiny grew darker, sharper, and inevitable. Storm broke as Erik, Leif, and Astrid marched toward Ragnar's stronghold, thunder rolling like war drums. Rain lashed their cloaks, soaking fur and leather, yet Erik's stride never faltered. His axe gleamed beneath lightning, each flash etching scars deeper into his face. Leif muttered, "We walk into death's mouth." Erik answered, voice steady, "Then we choke it." Astrid's gaze lingered on Erik, her lips tight with secrets unspoken. The fortress loomed, torches blazing like eyes of a beast awaiting its prey. Each step echoed destiny, drawing them closer to battle and betrayal alike. War horns blared from the fortress as Ragnar's men surged forward, shields raised and blades flashing. Erik roared and met them head-on, his axe splitting through wood and bone. Leif's arrows hissed through the rain, each strike precise, felling warriors before they reached the line. Astrid moved like a shadow, her dagger flashing, cutting through chaos. The ground churned with mud and blood, the storm masking screams. Erik fought with unrelenting fury, his voice rising above thunder. "Honor is not given, it is taken." With each strike, he drew closer to Ragnar's gate, the storm his ally and curse. From the fortress steps, Ragnar appeared, towering in blackened armor, wolf pelt trailing. His voice cut through the storm, "Exile returns to die." Erik charged, their clash thunder meeting thunder, axe against blade. Sparks showered with each blow, rage against rage. Ragnar struck hard, forcing Erik to his knees, sneering, "You were never worthy of tribe or crown." Erik gritted his teeth, lifting his weapon through sheer will, growling, "I fight not for crown, but for the dead you burn." Their duel blazed at the heart of battle, every strike a hymn to vengeance, every wound a mark of destiny. The clash echoed like thunder until Astrid moved, her dagger aimed not at Ragnar but at Erik's back. For a heartbeat, time froze, betrayal sharp as lightning. Leif's shout broke the moment. "Erik!" His arrow flew, striking Astrid's blade aside. Her eyes widened, torn between guilt and Ragnar's command. "You were mine to break," she hissed. Erik's gaze burned into hers, fury and sorrow entwined. Ragnar laughed, the storm masking all but the chaos of trust shattered. Astrid's cloak clung heavy with rain, her choice laid bare beneath the eyes of gods and men. The storm reached its peak as Erik and Ragnar clashed once more, steel ringing through the downpour. Ragnar's blade tore across Erik's side, blood mixing with rain, yet the exile stood unbroken. Erik raised the sword of eternal honor, its glow burning through storm and shadow, runes alight with ancient power. Ragnar's eyes widened in rage and fear as Erik thundered, "This ends now." Their weapons collided, the force shaking earth and sky. In that moment, exile became legend, and the storm bore witness to fate's cruel judgment. The battlefield lay drowned in silence as the storm faded, smoke rising from torches, now dimmed. Ragnar's body sprawled across the bloodied ground, his blade shattered beside him. Erik stood above him, chest heaving, the sword of eternal honor glowing faintly. Leif stumbled closer, blood staining his tunic, whispering, "It is done." Erik's gaze lingered on Ragnar's lifeless form, heavy with both victory and loss. Astrid knelt apart, her crimson cloak clinging to her as she lowered her eyes, torn between regret and ruin. The weight of survival pressed on all, yet destiny had chosen its victor. Astrid's voice cracked as she whispered, "I followed Ragnar for survival, but I never wanted this end." Her hands trembled as she reached for the dirt, clutching it as if to bury her shame. Erik's eyes burned with fury, yet within them flickered sorrow. "You chose betrayal," he said, his voice breaking, "and betrayal has no forgiveness." Leif drew his bow, aiming with trembling hands, but Erik lifted his arm to stop him. "Her punishment is not death," Erik muttered, "it is to live with the weight of her choices." Astrid wept silently, the crimson of her cloak staining the mud. Leif stood among the fallen, his face pale with exhaustion. "Too many lives lost," he said, voice heavy. Erik placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture firm yet fragile. "Their sacrifice will not be forgotten," Erik answered. Villagers emerged slowly from hiding, eyes wide with awe and grief. One whispered, "The exile has saved us." The words struck Erik harder than any blade. His exile, once a mark of shame, now stood as his banner. He looked at the sword, its glow fading as dawn crept higher, and he whispered, "Honor is carved, not given." Bjorn arrived with slow steps, his staff tapping against stone as he gazed at the ruin. "The prophecy is fulfilled," he murmured, eyes filled with both pride and sorrow. Erik turned to him, voice strained, "What now, old one?" Bjorn's face softened. "The sword has chosen, but honor's path is longer than battle. You must lead where blood has failed." Erik lowered his head, burden heavy on his shoulders. The raven circled above, crying out, as though sealing fate's decree. The air was still, yet its silence thundered louder than war. Erik stood alone at the ridge, the sword of eternal honor planted in the earth before him. The sea roared below, waves crashing like eternal drums. He whispered, "I was cast out, yet I rise not for myself, but for all who carry scars." Wind tore at his cloak, but he stood unshaken. Leif's voice called faintly in the distance, but Erik did not turn. He placed his hand upon the hilt, eyes fixed on the horizon. The storm had passed, yet its echo remained. In silence, his exile became legend, and the sword gleamed as dawn crowned the world anew.